All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to today's explainer. We're totally skipping the usual preamble today because, frankly, we're heading straight into the ultimate high-stakes environment, the World Series of Poker main event. So picture this. You've grinded for days, you are deep in the money, you can practically taste the final table. And then, the unthinkable happens. You take an absolutely brutal bad beat. What happens next? Well, that exact moment separates the legends from the rest of the field.
Okay, let's dive into this nightmare scenario. Top poker professional Alex Foxen perfectly sets the scene of a tournament player's worst fear. You're cruising, right? You've got a massive stack of 60 big blinds. A short stack shoves for 10 big blinds with a dominated hand, ace-jack. You look down at ace-king, you make the mathematically perfect call. The dealer burns, turns, and no way. Your opponent hits their three-outer. Just like that, a huge chunk of your hard-earned stack vanishes. And as Foxen notes, that is exactly when the psychological spiral begins. Which brings us to the ultimate question we are unpacking today. How do you survive when the wheels come off deep in a tournament? Because, let's be real, here is the harsh reality of tournament poker. The difference between just cashing out and actually taking home a bracelet, it isn't about avoiding bad beats altogether. I mean, that's literally statistically impossible over a multi-day event. The real difference is entirely in how you survive them. All right, section 1, the psychology of the spiral. To stop the bleeding, we first have to understand why a single bad beat causes such a massive internal meltdown. 50 big blinds. In Foxen's example, after the player loses that brutal flip, they still have 50 big blinds remaining. Now, to put that into perspective, deep in a tournament, the average stack is often only around 20 big blinds, so objectively, this player is still crushing the tournament. Yet, because of the sheer emotional trauma of the bad beat, their mind is screaming at them that the tournament is practically over. The perceived loss vastly outweighs the objective reality of their chips. So, what separates the pros here? There's a crucial divide between the high roller pro and the recreational player when disaster strikes. When a top high roller gets steamed out of their mind, they rely on what we can call an ingrained framework. Even if they are absolutely furious, they've studied so much that they automatically remember the exact cutoff opening ranges for a 30 big blind stack. The recreational player, though, they suffer an emotional override. Lacking that rock-solid fundamental baseline, their emotions just take complete control. That dictates their gameplay and leads to these erratic, tournament-ending mistakes. And this brilliantly illustrates the danger. Poker pro Ben Lamb recalls this mind-boggling anecdote of a player deep on day 6 or 7 of the main event. This guy misplayed a hand, realized he missed out on flopping 4 of a kind, and proceeded to completely tilt his entire stack away. Fatigue, lack of sleep, emotional exhaustion, they all compound. When you don't have that ingrained mental framework to fall back on, exhaustion destroys your decision-making precisely when the stakes are highest. And honestly, you kind of have to feel a tiny bit of empathy for the poor guy. So, how do we stop the spiral? Section 2, executing the mental reset. To stop the bleeding, a fundamental shift in mental framing has to happen immediately. 8,000. That's it. During one of his deep main event runs, former world champion Joe Cotta started day 2 with a really healthy 50,000 chips. But after a completely brutal sequence of hands, his stack plummeted all the way down to just 8,000 chips. Just 10 big blinds. But here is the punchline. He still made the final table. Cotta survived that horrific short stack situation on day 2, grounded out, and was still sitting there playing on day 8 or 9. It's the ultimate proof that a short stack is absolutely not a dead stack. Well, provided you don't throw it away in frustration anyway. You just have to maintain your focus and simply hang in there.
So, how exactly do the pros pull this off? Well, Foxen utilizes what we can call the puzzle concept. You have to see the game as a giant puzzle, treating every single hand dealt to you as a completely different entity. The pros, they don't dwell on the chips they had 5 minutes ago. Actually, scratch that. They don't even think about them. They look at the current players, the current dynamics, and the exact chips in front of them right now in this moment, and they just try to solve the math of the immediate puzzle.
So the crucial point is you have to let it go. Main event champion Joe McKeehan echoes this exact sentiment. He says you cannot get emotional because you used to have 60 big blinds. You have 20 now. That's your reality. You brush off the bad beat, focus solely on those 20 blinds, adjust to the table, and play that specific stack size optimally. It really requires a super clear-headed, long-term perspective. Okay, section 3, strategic stack adjustments. Once you achieve that mental reset, what actually changes when you plummet from chip leader down to the middle of the pack? The chronological process of resetting looks something like this. Step 1, as we discussed, is radical acceptance of your new stack. It is what it is. Step 2 is recalculating your pre-flop opening ranges. Obviously, you can't open as wide with 30 big blinds as you did with 100. And step 3 is absolutely crucial, formulating an instance tree map. This basically means planning out your responses in advance. If you open a hand with 30 big blinds, you need to know exactly what you're going to do if an opponent shoves over the top of you before you put your chips in the middle. And you know this lack of planning? It's exactly why really good cash game players often struggle in tournaments. Foxen identifies these specific tactical leaks. In cash games, you usually have this incredibly deep stock of like 200 big blinds behind you, which lets you bet purely on theory. But in tournaments, cash game players often have poor instance tree mapping. They might 3-bet a hand for value, but completely fail to realize they'll be forced to fold if their opponent 4-bet shoves on their 30 big blind stack. They also use static ranges instead of exploiting live opponents, and they size their post-flop bets as if they have infinite chips. They totally fail to adjust to those shallow tournament depths. Now, stack awareness becomes incredibly vital right around the tournament bubble. If your bad beat leaves you with 15 big blinds near the bubble, your strategy is super strict. You fold, you stall, and you survive an absurd amount just to ensure you make the money. But if you manage to maintain 40-plus big blinds, your strategy flips entirely. You aggressively abuse the bubble to steal equity from those terrified 15 big blind stacks. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Foxen views stack preservation before the bubble bursts. True tournament endurance sometimes means skipping a slightly profitable marginal spot. Why? Because taking a high variance flip could literally reduce your stack from 70 big blinds down to 25. If you preserve those chips instead, you maintain the maneuverability to aggressively pick up risk-free pots later on. Sometimes the absolute best move is the one you don't make, purely to protect your stack's utility. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. Look, bad beats are an unavoidable mathematical certainty in poker. So when you're deep in a tournament and the wheels inevitably come off, what will you do? Will you let the emotional spiral take over and blind you, or will you rely on an ingrained framework, immediately reset your mind, and treat the very next hand as a brand new puzzle to solve? The choice between those two paths, well, that's the exact difference between a forgotten run and a championship title. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you in the next one.